60 Minutes Overtime.
There are mysteries surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's death, and even after reviewing all the autopsy photos, reading the autopsy, and looking at the photos from inside the cell, we still have questions. What we do know is that Jeffrey Epstein is dead. The fingerprints of the body in the morgue matched the fingerprints that were taken of Jeffrey Epstein from when he was booked in Florida.
How long does the autopsy typically take from beginning to end?
Normally about 2 hours, a routine autopsy.
We spoke to multiple pathologists for this story, and they all pretty much agree on one thing, that without knowing the position of the body, the way that Jeffrey Epstein's body was found, it's almost impossible to determine the cause of death with any certainty. Knowing the position that a body was found in is a key piece of evidence in any death investigation. And in this case, we don't know how Jeffrey Epstein's body was found.
We still don't have that information. So if this was called a suicide without all that information, it was a premature judgment.
Dr. Michael Baden is a forensic pathologist who was hired by Mark Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein's brother, to look into the death and to kind of investigate it for the family. The autopsy reveals that Jeffrey Epstein had petechiae, which is burst vessels. Dr. Baden says that's a key indicator that somebody's neck was compressed and that you see it more in a compression than you do see it in a hanging. We know from the autopsy that Jeffrey Epstein had a number of other injuries. There was an injury to the back of his neck and had an injection mark very clearly in his arm. We don't know what that's from. We don't know if that happened at the hospital or if it's something else. We just don't know because we've not been able to get the medical records from inside the MCC.
There were 3 fractures of the neck bones.
Dr. Baden's key reasons for being suspicious about the death of Jeffrey Epstein is the broken hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage.
Tell me about what we're seeing right here. What are we looking at?
Here is the jawbone, the jawbone of the mandible, the lower bone in the head. And underneath that, at the bottom, are the clavicles and the breastbone, where the muscles insert. The red are all muscles. The hyoid bone is a small bone here just above the Adam's apple, which is the thyroid cartilage. And in Jeffrey Epstein's autopsy, there were fractures of the left, the right thyroid cartilage, and the left hyoid bone, all requiring different kinds of pressure and positioning of the noose, of the ligature.
One of the pathologists we spoke to absolutely agreed with Dr. Baden and says, yes, that's very suspicious to have all 3 of those bones broken, the cartilage broken. Another pathologist we spoke to wasn't as convinced and said it doesn't necessarily indicate homicide. The doctor who performed the autopsy, while Dr. Michael Baden observed, came to the determination that it was inconclusive and they needed more evidence, more information. And then a couple days later, they changed that and determined that the cause of death was suicide by hanging. We reached out to the New York City Medical Examiner, but they would not speak to us, presumably because there's an ongoing investigation, but we haven't heard back from that office.
In the pictures of the cell, there are multiple nooses. The fact that the medical examiner sketched one noose, this is the noose they think was responsible for killing Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, this would be the ligature, the noose, that was involved in causing the death. That's why it was sketched.
Here it says on here, it appears to say folded. The edge is folded here.
One of the things we have heard is that the guard that found Jeffrey Epstein cut him down, which you'd seem to indicate somebody cutting down a noose or something. If you look at the noose that the medical examiner examined, and you look very closely at the edges, it appears perfectly hemmed. It doesn't look like anybody ever took scissors to it. So there is some question, is that the right noose? The difficulties with this story is because they charged 2 guards, there is a firewall and you cannot get information because you go to the Department of Justice, you go to the FBI and say, hey, what's going on here? And they said, there's an ongoing criminal investigation. We can't tell you anything. That's made it especially difficult. We've had to rely to people on the ground and sources placed throughout the story. We have examined many photos, looked at the evidence, and talked to so many people, but we still have many questions, and we're looking forward to getting more answers.